After being raised in southern Indiana and marrying Marceline Baldwin, Jim Jones began his church, the People's Temple, in 1959 in a lower-income, predominantly African-American neighborhood in Indianapolis, Indiana. Through racial integration, he attracted a following of hundreds. When some of his congregants left in favor of other growing and more dominant civil rights movements, Jones moved the church to California in 1965 to redefine and reignite his church in a more liberal environment. While in Redwood Valley, California, Jones formed his first attempt at a socialist commune. Jones gained followings of thousands in both Los Angeles and San Francisco with the ideas of racial equality and socialism. But after Jones's shady financial dealings, drug use, and sexual harassment gained public attention, he convinced his most loyal followers to flee to a Guyanese agricultural commune he had initiated a year prior. He named this place Jonestown. As scrutiny of him and the People's Temple grew, Jones became increasingly paranoid. When news reporters came to investigate him on November 18th, he and his followers killed many of them and then committed mass suicide, resulting in over 800 deaths. But how could Jones have persuaded these people to follow him to the Guyanese jungle and kill themselves, and in some cases their children? Well, as a result of the controlled communication both within and out of the People's Temple, Jim Jones and his many followers created a socialist commune, harassed many cult members, murdered Congressman Leo Ryan, and enacted the infamous mass suicide at the Jonestown site in Guyana.
Now, is the pain gone?
To begin to control his followers, Jones had to first demonstrate how he was better than them. In Indiana, he used fake healings and mind readings to do this.
One of the biggest draws of People's Temple was his supposed ability to do faith healings.
The healings were done by curing a fake illness of a planted audience member, and Jones used information given to other followers to read the minds of newcomers. He also established his churches in poorer African American areas because, as a moderately wealthy white man, Jones's requests to government officials on behalf of low-income African Americans were more likely to produce results. In California, Jones's fake healings escalated into resurrections and convinced some followers he was God. After gaining people's allegiances by demonstrating his power, Jones then stripped his followers of all of their possessions so they were reliant on Jones and the church for everything from clothes to housing to food. Hoosiers that had come to California could not afford to live in California homes, so they became reliant on Jones and his socialistic ideals to survive. Finally, for those that came to the church with some assets, Jones persuaded them that they must sign over everything to the church as an act of fellowship. Since Jones was the only person who these people knew and he had all the money, they were stuck in his socialist commune if they wanted to live.
Taxation drains the victim's blood. The rich are free from obligations. The laws the poor delude. Too long we've languished in subjection.
To keep his followers loyal to him, Jones made sure that they had something or someone to fight against. With something to fight against, they had a reason to need him and the church. Initially, this was only racism, but in California, it took a much more drastic turn. He believed that the CIA and FBI were after him, and convinced his followers of this to keep them loyal to him. He staged assassination attempts on his life to both demonstrate the government's threat against his socialist cause and his healing powers. He also turned down newcomers who seemed as though they would ruin the us against them mentality. In Guyana, when the news reporters and Congressman Leo Ryan came, Jones persuaded his followers that they were there to attack them and their way of life.
Between all races, surely you believe in that. We've heard about economic equality. Even Governor Rockefeller says we need more of that. The world is beginning to say the rich have had it too easy.
Another way Jones was able to persuade his followers so well was by playing into their beliefs.
Jones so used the rhetoric and the attractive language of his time and place. He had a message that was handcrafted for the people of that time.
In Indiana, his followers were for segregation, so he said that he was for segregation and preached for an equal earth. California, since most were already slightly socialist and against the Vietnam War that was going on, Jones described the American government as evil because they only wanted war and violence. When the Watergate scandal happened, Jones monopolized his followers' governmental concerns and said that Nixon would destroy the world. Jones' talks of healing also resonated with older people who had health problems. With this type of persuasion, many saw Jones as someone who believed in similar things and wanted the same end goal.
No more pain, I said, Al. No more pain. Jim Cobb is laying on the airfield dead at this moment.
Jones also leveraged the mob mentality to gain complete devotion of his followers. Once he had enough loyal followers who believed in his socialist cause, it was quite easy to recruit more and do whatever he wanted. If one person spoke against Jones or accused him of sexual harassment, Jones convinced his followers that they were lying and they were shunned.
Say, Johnny Smith, come up here front and center. And so then the people in the congregation would say, get up there, get up there.
This led to Jones getting away with drug abuse, beatings, and sexual harassment, which nobody could talk about because the mob would shun them as well. In Guyana, Jones persuaded his followers to look happy in front of the cameramen because if they did not, the mob of his followers would hurt them. The mob mentality also caused the people to drink cyanide because they were forced by Jones's loyal followers.
But you can't steal people's children. You can't take off with people's children without expecting a violent reaction.
Jones also controlled communication through threatening and force.
Punishment became a normal thing, and punishment went from you're going to write lines, this many lines for, whatever you did wrong, to corporal punishment.
In California and Guyana, when a few of his followers defected, Jones worried they would tell the press of the harassment in the church. He initially attempted to control actions through threats. Jones threatened to kill the children of certain followers, such as Grace Towen and his wife Marceline, if they told the press. In Guyana, after learning that some defectors had already escaped and told the press of the sexual harassment occurring in Guyana, Jones ordered his guards to capture and physically abuse anybody else who tried to escape. The final way Jones was able to control the communication of his church for so long was through control of the press and government. In Redwood Valley, California, Jones bribed and sent followers to work at the daily newspaper company so no paper shined negative light on the People's Temple. When the San Francisco Examiner was about to reveal what was really occurring inside the temple, Jones formed a rally outside of the news station and bribed the higher-ups not to publish the piece. Jones also found a way to control the government.
His power came from his ability to turn out the vote.
Jones would supply folks for rallies. They would walk precincts.
In 1975, George Moscone ran for San Francisco mayor, and Jones' temple raised enough votes for him to win. Jones also made sure he was safe inside Guyana through close relations with Prime Minister Burnham.
We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide protesting the conditions of an inhumane world.
Although survivors who escaped Guyana or stayed in California were harassed physically and sexually, they suffered the fewest effects of Jones's followers. In Guyana, the need to control communication made Jones persuade his men to kill Congressman Leo Ryan, some concerned relatives of the Jonestown victims, and also many news reporters. Obviously, the largest short-term effect was the mass murder of more than 800 people at the Jonestown site in Guyana, leaving behind many grieving families. People's Temple's story allows for people to identify cults today and try and avoid them. We can use the People's Temple story to identify others who could rise to power like Jones did. For example, QAnon uses some of the elements Jones did. They play into the partisan beliefs of their followers to gain a following. They also used mob mentality to attack Democrats. Finally, early identification of cults through communication patterns can also result in earlier intervention. If the government had investigated the People's Temple before Jones had gone to Guyana, the massacre could have been prevented.